In the frozen heart of the Northern Territory, the wind didn't just howl. It hunted. It chewed through layers of cheap fabric and gnawed at the marrow of the bone. For Elara, the biting chill felt like a personal judgment from the moon goddess herself. She shoved a frostbitten hand into her pocket, retrieving a coil of scavenged twine she had found near an abandoned trapper site 2 days ago. It was fraying, weak, and smelled of rot, but it was the only thing keeping her world together. In front of her stood the pathetic skeleton of what she hoped would be a shelter. It was barely a structure, just a collection of fallen pine branches, brittle birch twigs, and mud that was rapidly freezing into useless clumps. "Stay up," she whispered, her voice a raspy friction of dehydration and exhaustion. "Just stay up. Please." She wrapped the twine around the junction of 3 branches, her fingers moving with a practiced, desperate rhythm. Elara wasn't just a random wolf thrown into the wild. Back in the frost-bound pack, she had been the daughter of the lead architect. She knew load-bearing walls, she knew insulation, and she knew the geometry of survival. But knowledge was a hollow weapon without materials. You cannot build a fortress out of kindling. A gust of wind stronger than the last roared down the valley. The flimsy structure groaned. With a sickening snap, the main support branch, a piece of deadwood she had dragged for 2 miles, gave way. The entire lean-to collapsed, burying her meager supply of dried berries and her only blanket in the snow. Elara stared at the ruin. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She was too empty for that. She simply fell to her knees and began digging through the snow to find her blanket. 2 days, she muttered to the empty forest. I have 2 days before the true winter sets in. If I'm not undercover by then, I'm dead. She had been exiled 3 weeks ago, not for a crime she committed, but for one she refused to commit. The alpha of Frostbound, a cruel man named Silas, had demanded she marry his son to merge their bloodlines. Silas believed Elara's family carried the gene for the sight, an old wolf ability to sense structural weaknesses in any fortification. He wanted to breed her like livestock to build war machines. When she refused, Silas had marked her as a rogue. "Run, little builder," Silas had laughed as his enforcers dragged her to the border. "See how long you last without a roof over your head." She was proving him right. She was failing. Elara wiped her nose on her sleeve, standing up on shaking legs. She looked around the clearing. She was technically trespassing. This territory belonged to the Obsidian Fangpack. Their alpha, Kaelen, was a myth. A man said to be more wolf than human, a king among alphas who ruled the entire northern quadrant. They said he killed rogues for sport. They said he allowed no weakness on his land. Let him come, Elara thought, grabbing a jagged branch and trying to snap it to size. At least if he kills me, I'll be warm for a few seconds before I die. She bent down, trying to wedge the branch into the frozen earth. Her hands were raw, covered in blisters that had popped and frozen over. She pushed with all her remaining strength. Snap! The wood shattered in her grip, driving a long splinter deep into her palm. The pain was sharp and hot. Elara gasped, clutching her hand to her chest. She looked up at the gray sky, blinking back tears of frustration. And that was when she felt it. The weight of a gaze. Heavy. Primal. Elara froze. Slowly she turned her head toward the rocky ridge that overlooked the valley. Standing there, silhouetted against the dying light of the afternoon sun, was a wolf. But calling it a wolf felt like an insult to its size. It was massive, its fur the color of midnight, absorbing the light around it. It stood motionless, like a statue carved from volcanic rock. Its eyes were glowing gold, piercing through the distance, locked directly onto her. It was him, the king. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew she should bow or run or show her throat in submission. That was the law of the wild. But she was tired. She was so incredibly tired of bowing to men who wanted to use her or kill her. She held the giant wolf's gaze. She raised her bleeding hand, wrapped the torn fabric of her sleeve around the splinter, and turned her back to him. She reached for another branch. If she was going to die, she would die working. She would die building something, even if it was just a pile of trash. High on the ridge, the massive black wolf did not move. He watched her struggle with the frozen wood. He watched her fall, get up, and fall again. He watched until the sun dipped below the horizon, and darkness swallowed the valley. Only then did he turn and vanish into the trees. The night passed in a haze of shivering delirium. Elara had huddled in the hollow of an old oak tree, wrapped in her damp blanket, drifting in and out of consciousness. She dreamed of fire. She dreamed of hot soup. She dreamed of Silas laughing as her father's workshop burned down. She woke to the sound of thunder. Elara jolted awake, her muscles screaming in protest. She blinked, confused. The sky was clear, a brilliant, piercing blue. There were no storm clouds, yet the ground beneath her vibrated with a rhythmic, heavy thudding sound. Thud. 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 It sounded like a giant walking. She scrambled out of the hollow tree, gripping a sharpened stick she used for protection. "Who's there?" she croaked, her voice weak. She stepped into the clearing where her failed shelter lay in ruins. She dropped the stick. Her mouth fell open. The clearing was no longer empty. 6 men stood there. They were huge, shirtless, despite the freezing temperature, their skin radiating the high heat of transformed werewolves. They were moving with military precision, but they weren't attacking. They were unloading a flatbed truck that had somehow navigated the old logging road, and they weren't unloading weapons. They were unloading timber. Not just branches or scraps. These were massive, cured cedar logs, rich red and aromatic. The kind of timber that cost a fortune. The kind of timber used for mansions, not rogue shacks. "Easy on the left flank. Watch the mud," shouted a man with sandy blonde hair and a scar running through his eyebrow. This was Bastion, the beta of the Obsidian Fang Pack. Elara stood frozen, watching as 2 massive men hoisted a 20-foot log as if it were a toothpick and set it down in a perfect square formation. They were laying a foundation. "What?" Elara whispered, stepping forward. "What are you doing?" Bastion turned. He didn't look at her with the disgust usually reserved for rogues. He looked at her with curiosity, and perhaps a hint of pity. He wiped his hands on his jeans and walked over, stopping a respectable 10 feet away. "Ma'am," Bastion nodded, "you're in a flood zone. The mud here won't hold a structure once the snow melts in spring. We're sinking pylons first." Elara stared at him, her brain unable to process the information. You're building?" "We are," Bastion said. "Why?" Elara demanded, her defensive instincts flaring up. "Is this a trap? Is Kaelen going to lock me in it and burn it down?" The activity in the clearing stopped. The other 5 wolves paused, looking toward the edge of the forest. From the shadows of the pines, a man emerged. He was tall, towering over even the large pack members. He wore a heavy shearling coat, left unbuttoned, revealing a black thermal shirt that strained against his chest. His hair was dark, wind-blown, and his eyes were the same piercing gold as the wolf on the ridge. Kaelen, the Alpha King. He didn't walk. He stalked. The air around him seemed to crackle with static electricity. He walked past his men, past the pile of expensive lumber, and stopped directly in front of Elara. Up close, he was terrifying. The power radiating off him was enough to make an ordinary wolf drop to their knees, but Elara was too confused to kneel. Kaelen looked down at her. His gaze dropped to her hands, dirty, bloody, and wrapped in rags. He reached out. Elara flinched, pulling back. "Give me your hand," Kaelen said. His voice was deep, a low rumble that vibrated in Alara's chest. It wasn't a request. Trembling, Elara extended her hand. Kaelen took it gently. His hands were calloused and warm. impossibly warm. He unwrapped the dirty rag, exposing the angry, infected puncture wound from the splinter. His jaw tightened. A flash of anger crossed his face, but it wasn't directed at her. "Bastion," Kaelen said, never looking away from Elara's wound. "The medical kit." "Now." "Yes, Alpha." Kaelen looked into Elara's wary eyes. "You were trying to build a weaving joint with rotten pine," he said quietly. "It collapsed because the tensile strength of the wood was compromised, not because of your skill. Your knotwork was perfect." Elara blinked. You watched me?" "I watched you try to survive," Kaelen corrected. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small object. It was the piece of broken branch she had snapped yesterday. He had picked it up. "You used a weaver's knot that hasn't been used in these parts for a century. It's the mark of a master builder." "I just wanted a roof," Elara whispered. "You don't build roofs out of garbage," Kaelen said, his voice hardening. He gestured to the pile of premium cedar behind him. "You build them out of this. This is red cedar from the heart of my territory. It is rot-proof, insect-proof, and it holds heat better than stone." "I can't pay you," Elara said, panic rising. "I have nothing. I'm a rogue. I have no money, no pack, no trade goods." Kaelen stepped closer, invading her personal space. The scent of him, pine needles, rain, and raw power, flooded her senses. He lowered his head so his lips were inches from her ear. "I didn't ask for payment," Kaelen murmured, "but I will ask for a trade." "What trade?" Elara asked, her breath hitching. "I provide the materials and the labor for the heavy lifting," Kaelen said, pulling back to look at her. "And you design it. You design the outpost. Not a shack, a fortress. I need someone who knows how to build things that don't break." "Why me?" Elara asked. "You have engineers." "My engineers build boxes," Kaelen said, his eyes darkening. "You built a work of art out of trash while starving to death. I want to see what you can do when you have the strength to stand." He released her hand as Bastion returned with the medical kit. "Fix her hand," Kaelen ordered his beta. Then he turned to the group of wolves waiting by the truck. "Double time! I want the floor joists down before noon. If she gets cold again, you're all running laps until you vomit." "Yes, Alpha," the men roared in unison. Elara stood there, stunned. As the most powerful man in the region stripped off his heavy coat, rolled up his sleeves, and grabbed a sledgehammer. He didn't just command them, he joined them. As Bastion cleaned her wound with stinging antiseptic, Elara watched Kaelen swing the hammer. With every strike, the ground shook. She realized with a jolt that he wasn't just building a cabin, he was staking a claim. He was building her a home on his land. But Elara knew something Kaelen didn't. Silas, the Alpha of Frostbound, was tracking her. And if Silas found out she was building a fortress for his rival, a simple cabin construction would turn into a war zone. "He's going to get you all killed," Elara whispered to Bastion. Bastion chuckled, applying a bandage to her palm. He looked at his Alpha, who was driving a pylon into the frozen earth with terrifying force. "Miss," Bastion said softly, "you clearly don't know who he is. Kaelen doesn't get killed. He's the one who does the killing. And looking at how he's looking at you, I'd pity anyone who tries to stop him." By noon, the foundation of the cabin had been laid. It was a grid of interlocking cedar beams that smelled of wealth and security. The obsidian fang pack worked like a machine, efficient, silent, and terrifyingly strong. But they were working based on standard military protocols, building a square, defensible box. Elara stood by the fire Bastion had built, holding a mug of hot broth that scalded her lips in the best way possible. The warmth was spreading through her limbs, thawing the ice in her veins, but her eyes were glued to the structure. Her sight was itching behind her eyelids. It wasn't magic in the way witches cast spells. It was a hyper-awareness of geometry and physics, a trait bred into her family line for generations. She could see the stress lines in the wood like glowing red veins, "Stop!" Elara yelled. The command tore out of her throat before she could check herself. Silence slammed into the clearing. 6 massive werewolves froze mid-motion. One of them, a brute named Jackson, was holding a sledgehammer high above his head, ready to drive a support pin into the corner joint. Jackson lowered the hammer slowly, turning to glare at the small, ragged woman by the fire. "Excuse me?" Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. In her old pack, speaking out of turn got her slapped, but she couldn't let them make this mistake. The grain," Elara stammered, stepping forward. She pointed a trembling finger at the corner post Jackson was securing. "The grain on that post is twisted. It has a knot on the internal side. If you drive that pin in, you'll split the core. The first heavy snow load will collapse the southeast corner." Jackson scoffed, wiping sweat from his forehead. "This is A-grade cedar, sweetheart. It doesn't split." "It will," Elara insisted, her voice gaining a fraction more strength. "The tension is wrong. You need to rotate it 90 degrees or swap it out." Jackson looked at Kaelen, who was standing by the truck. "Alpha, do I have to listen to the stray? We're losing daylight." Kaelen looked up. His golden eyes didn't look at Jackson. They locked onto Elara. He walked over, his heavy boots crunching on the frozen mud. He stopped in front of the post Elara had indicated. He ran his large hand over the wood, closing his eyes for a second. "She's right," Kaelen said, his voice low and dangerous. Jackson blinked. "Alpha?" "There's a hairline fracture under the bark," Kaelen said, opening his eyes. He looked at Elara with a newfound intensity. "Most wolves couldn't smell that." "How did you know?" "I didn't smell it," Elara said, clutching her mug tighter. "I saw it. The weight distribution. It looked wrong." Kaelen stared at her for a long moment, an unreadable expression on his face. Then he turned to his men. "You heard her? Swap the post. From now on, nobody drives a nail or lays a log until she clears it. She is the architect. You are the labor. Is that understood?" "Yes, Alpha," the pack chorused, though Jackson looked grumpy about it. For the next 4 hours, the dynamic shifted. Elara, fueled by the soup and a strange, bubbling adrenaline, began to direct them. She moved around the site, her limp becoming less pronounced as she focused. She wasn't building a simple square cabin anymore. She directed them to angle the roof steeply to shed snow, to reinforce the windward wall with double-locking joints, and to raise the floor 2 feet higher to create an air pocket for insulation. She was brilliant. Kaelen watched her more than he watched the construction. He saw how her mind worked, fast, precise, and uncompromising when it came to safety. She was commanding his elite warriors, men who had killed in wars, and they were listening to her because her instructions made sense. As the sun began to dip, painting the sky in hues of violent orange and purple, Elara was inspecting the ridge beam. She was standing on a ladder, reaching up to check a joint. Suddenly, a wave of dizziness hit her. The adrenaline wore off, and the reality of 2 days of starvation crashed back in. Her vision blurred. Her knees buckled. She fell backward off the ladder. "Elara!" She didn't hit the frozen ground. She hit a wall of solid muscle and heat. Kaelen had moved with supernatural speed, catching her easily in his arms. The impact knocked the wind out of her, but she was safe. She was pressed against his chest, her face buried in the crook of his neck, and then she smelled it. Underneath the sweat and pine, there was a scent that made her wolf whimper in longing. It was the scent of burning embers and deep earth. It was the scent of home. Kaelen stiffened. He felt it too. The mate bond. It wasn't a soft realization. It was a primal slam. Now that the scent of sickness and rot was fading from her, her true scent, vanilla and rain, was hitting him full force. He looked down at the fragile woman in his arms. She was his. The moon goddess had given the ruthless Alpha King a mate who was broken, starving, and brilliant. "I've got you," Kaelen growled, his voice vibrating through her body. "I've got you, little architect." Elara looked up, her eyes wide. She saw the gold in his eyes flaring, the pupil expanding to swallow the iris. She knew what that look meant. "Put me down," she whispered, panic warring with attraction. "Please, you can't. I'm a rogue." "You are whatever I say you are," Kaelen replied, his grip tightening possessively. "And right now, you are freezing." He didn't put her down. He carried her toward the truck, barking orders over his shoulder. "Bastion, finish the roof tarp! We camp here tonight." "She's not strong enough to move yet," Jackson muttered to Bastion as they watched their alpha carry the girl. "Did you see his eyes? He's gone possessive." Bastion smiled grimly. "About time. But if she's who I think she is, the missing builder from Frostbound, then Silas is going to come looking for her, and Kaelen is going to start a war to keep her." Night in the Obsidian territory was absolute. The darkness was thick, heavy, and silent, broken only by the crackling of a large fire the pack had built in the center of the half-finished cabin. They had tarped over the roof beams to block the wind, creating a cozy makeshift shelter. Elara sat on a pile of sleeping bags, wrapped in a fur blanket that smelled like Kaelen. She was eating again, venison stew this time. Kaelen sat opposite her, watching her eat with an intensity that made her hands shake. He hadn't touched her since carrying her to the fire, but his presence was suffocating. "Why?" Elara asked, breaking the silence. The other wolves were outside patrolling the perimeter. It was just the two of them. "Why what?" Kaelen asked, sharpening a stick with a hunting knife. "Why are you helping me? You're the Alpha King. You kill rogues. You don't build houses for them." Kaelen stopped whittling. He looked up, the firelight dancing in his golden eyes. "I kill threats. I kill parasites. You are neither." "I am a threat," Elara said bitterly. "The Alpha of Frostbound Silas. He wants me back. He thinks I'm his property. If he finds out you helped me, he'll attack your borders." "Let him," Kaelen said simply. He tossed the stick into the fire. "I've been looking for an excuse to tear Silas's throat out for years. His expansionist policies annoy me." "He wants my blood," Elara whispered, looking down at her scarred hands. "He wants to breed me to create builders for his war engines. He killed my father when he refused to sign the contract." A low growl rumbled in Kaelen's chest. It was involuntary, a sound of pure, predatory rage. "He touched your family?" "He destroyed my family." Kaelen moved. In a blur, he was crouching in front of her. He reached out and tilted her chin up so she had to look at him. "He will never touch you again," Kaelen vowed. "This cabin? This is just the start. You have a skill, Elara. A gift. You saw the weakness in that wood today when my best men couldn't. You are valuable." "Is that all?" Elara asked, her voice trembling. "I'm useful?" Kaelen's thumb brushed her cheekbone. The sparks that flew between them were undeniable. "No, that is not all. But you are scared, and you are hurt. So I will not burden you with the rest tonight." He was holding back. He was holding back the claim, the mating bite, everything his wolf was screaming for, because he knew she was traumatized. Elara felt a tear leak out. She leaned into his touch just for a second. "Thank you." Outside the circle of firelight, 300 yards away in the dense tree line, a shadow moved. It was not a bear or a deer. It was a man dressed in camouflage gear designed to mask his scent. He held high-powered binoculars to his eyes. This was Vance, the head scout for the Frostbound pack, Silas's best tracker. Vance adjusted the focus on the lenses. Through the gaps in the tarp, he could see the firelight. He saw the massive silhouette of Kaelen, the Alpha King, and sitting in front of him, looking cleaner but still recognizable, was the target. "Found you," Vance whispered. He reached for the radio on his belt, clicking the encrypted channel. "Alpha Silas," Vance whispered into the mic. "Report." Silas's voice crackled back, tiny and cold. "I have eyes on the asset. She is in Sector 4, near the ridge." "Is she alone?" "Negative," Vance said, a bead of cold sweat rolling down his neck. She is with the Obsidian Pack. And Alpha, it looks like Kaelen is with her personally. There was a long silence on the other end, then a dark, amused laugh. Kaelen is protecting my runaway bride, Silas mused. Interesting. He must have realized what she is. If Kaelen gets access to her sight, his fortifications will be impenetrable. We cannot allow that. Orders? Vance asked. Do not engage Kaelen. You will die, Silas said. Create a diversion, spook them. I want to see how she reacts. I want to confirm she hasn't been broken yet. And Vance, mark the location for a strike team. We're coming to get her back. Understood. Vance holstered the radio. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small, spherical device, a flashbang grenade. It wasn't lethal, but it was loud, and it would cause chaos. He crept closer, moving downwind. He needed to get within throwing range. Inside the shelter, Kaelen's head snapped up. His nostrils flared. What is it? Elara asked, sensing his tension. The wind shifted, Kaelen said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. Someone is out there. Someone who smells like sulfur and cheap tobacco. Frostbound, Elara gasped. That's their scent. Stay here, Kaelen commanded. Do not move. He stood up, shedding his humanity like a coat. His bones cracked and shifted. In seconds, the man was gone, replaced by the massive midnight black wolf. He let out a roar that shook the half-built walls of the cabin, a sound of pure warning. But Vance was already winding up his arm. He pulled the pin and hurled the grenade. It sailed through the air, arching over the unfinished walls. It didn't land in the fire. It landed right at Elara's feet. Time seemed to slow down. Elara stared at the metal sphere. She knew what it was. Her father had used them for clearing rocks. The Alpha King was too far away to reach her in time. Elara didn't scream. Her builder's instinct took over. She grabbed the heavy cast-iron skillet from the fire and slammed it down over the grenade, throwing her body weight on top of the pan, curling into a tight ball. Boom! The explosion was muffled, but the force of it threw Elara backward. The skillet rang like a bell, containing the shrapnel, but not the concussive force. Elara! The roar from the Alpha King was not human. It was the sound of a monster whose heart had just been threatened. Kaelen didn't chase the scent in the woods. He turned back, shifting into human form mid-stride, sliding on his knees to get to her. Smoke filled the shelter. Elara was coughing, her ears ringing, but she was alive. The skillet had saved her. I'm okay, she choked out, waving the smoke away. Kaelen grabbed her, pulling her against his chest, checking her for blood. He was shaking. The Alpha King was shaking. They found me, Elara wept into his chest. Silas knows I'm here. Kaelen looked out into the darkness where the grenade had come from. His eyes were glowing with a violence that promised death. Let him come, Kaelen snarled. He just made the last mistake of his life. Nobody bombs my mate's house and lives to talk about it. He lifted her up, his voice booming to his men outside. Bastion! Defensive formation! We are moving her to the fortress. The cabin is compromised. War is here. The drive to the Obsidian Fang headquarters took 3 hours of navigating winding mountain roads in a convoy of armored SUVs. Elara sat in the back of the lead vehicle, wrapped in a heated blanket, watching the landscape change from wild forest to imposing fortifications. Kaelen sat beside her, one hand resting on her knee, his touch grounding her. He was on the phone constantly, barking orders in a language that was half military code and half business strategy. He wasn't just a wolf leader, he was a CEO of a massive empire, and currently he was liquidating assets to prepare for a war. We're here, Kaelen said, hanging up the phone as they rounded a final bend. Elara looked up and gasped. She had expected a castle or a log compound. What she saw was a masterpiece of modern brutalist architecture, carved directly into the living rock of the mountain. It was all jagged concrete, reinforced steel, and massive panes of bulletproof glass that reflected the moon. It looked less like a home and more like a weapon aimed at the sky. "The Obsidian Crag," Kaelen said, pride coloring his voice. "Safest place on the continent. The walls are 3 feet of reinforced concrete. The glass can stop a sniper round." Elara's eyes narrowed. Her sight flared involuntarily. She scanned the imposing structure, admiring the load-bearing columns and the cantilevered balconies. It was impressive. It was powerful. But it wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. The convoy pulled into a massive underground garage. As soon as the doors opened, the tension was palpable. Dozens of pack members were waiting. Warriors, strategists, and elders. They didn't look happy. As Kaelen helped Elara out of the car, a hush fell over the crowd. She looked small, pale, and dressed in oversized clothes borrowed from Bastion. She smelled of sickness and fear, overlaid with Kaelen's scent. A tall man with graying hair and a face like a topographic map of scars stepped forward. He wore a tactical vest and carried himself with the authority of a general. This was Marek, the pack commander. "Alpha," Marek said, his voice clipped. "We are at DEFCON 2. The scouts report frost-bound forces mobilizing on the southern border. They are bringing heavy machinery." "Let them come," Kaelen said, guiding Elara toward the elevator. Marek stepped into Kaelen's path. It was a bold move, one that drew gasps from the crowd. "With all due respect, Alpha, we are going to war for her? A rogue? A stray found in the woods?" Kaelen stopped. The air temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "She is not a stray, Marek. She is my mate." The declaration rang through the concrete garage like a gunshot. Marek flinched, but he held his ground. "Mate or not, she is a liability. Silas isn't attacking for territory. He's attacking for her. If we hand her over, the war stops. We cannot risk the pack for one woman." "I would burn this world to ash before I hand her over," Kaelen snarled, his eyes flashing gold. "Stand down, Commander." "I'm looking at the structural integrity of the pack," Marek shouted, his frustration boiling over. "She brings nothing but a target on her back." "Actually," a quiet voice cut through the testosterone-fueled shouting. Everyone turned. Elara had stepped out from behind Kaelen. She was trembling, her hands clenched into fists to hide the shaking, but her eyes were fixed on a massive support pillar near the elevator bank, the main artery of the garage. "What did you say?" Marek snapped, looking down at her with disdain. Elara pointed at the pillar. "You have a hairline stress fracture on the C4 column. It's being caused by the vibration of the ventilation unit above it. If a truck hits that pillar at more than 30 miles per hour, or if an explosion happens within 20 feet, the entire north wing of the garage collapses." Marek blinked. "That's impossible. That column is reinforced steel." "The steel is fine," Elara said, her voice gaining strength as the technical details took over. "The concrete casing is delaminating. Look at the dust pattern on the floor. It's fine gray powder. That's concrete fatigue." Kaelen looked at the floor. He saw the dust. He looked at the pillar. "Bastion," Kaelen ordered. "Get the sonic scanner." Bastion ran to a tool locker and returned with a handheld device. He pressed it against the pillar Elara had pointed to. The machine beeped frantically, flashing red. "She's right," Bastion said, his face paling. "Structural integrity is at 40%. One well-placed bomb and the upper levels would come down on top of us." Silence descended on the garage. The hostility shifted into shock. Marek looked from the scanner to the small, fragile woman he had just called a liability. Elara looked at the commander. "I don't want people to die for me, but if Silas attacks, he won't just hit the walls. He'll hit the weak points. I can see them. Let me help you fix them." Kaelen looked at his mate, a fierce pride swelling in his chest. He turned to his stunned pack. She is not just a mouth to feed, Kaelen announced, his voice echoing with authority. She is the architect. From this moment on, her word on defense protocols overrides everyone, including me. Does anyone else have an objection? Nobody moved. Good, Kaelen said. He wrapped an arm around Elara's waist. Now, get a crew on that pillar. Reinforce it with carbon fiber mesh. We have work to do. As they walked toward the elevator, leaving the stunned warriors behind, Kaelen leaned down and kissed the top of Elara's head. You are amazing, he whispered. I just don't want the roof to fall on us, Elara mumbled, her face burning. It won't, Kaelen promised, because you're here. The next 12 hours were a blur of caffeine, blueprints, and welding sparks. Elara was installed in the war room, a high-tech command center on the top floor of the crag. She was no longer the shivering rogue in the snow. She was a woman on a mission. She had the blueprints of the entire fortress spread out on a massive digital table. Kaelen stood by her side, feeding her coffee and keeping the curious and skeptical generals at bay. Here, Elara said, circling a ventilation shaft on the schematic. And here, at the drainage outflow. These are vulnerabilities. Silas's wolves are smaller than yours on average. They can fit through these pipes if they dislocate their shoulders. We'll weld grates over them, Merrick said. He was still grumpy, but he was listening now. Double grates, Elara corrected. Cross-hatched, and put motion sensors inside the shafts. The preparations were interrupted by the red flashing light of the perimeter alarm. Contact! A tech officer shouted from the monitoring station. Southern quadrant. 3 vehicles approaching the main gate. They're flying a white flag. Kaelen stared at the screen. A parlay? It's a distraction, Elara said immediately. Silas doesn't negotiate. We have to answer it, Kaelen said, buttoning his tactical shirt. If I refuse a parlay, I violate the Alpha Treaty. The Council will strip me of my title. He knows that, Elara said, gripping Kaelen's arm. He's drawing you out. I'll be careful, Kaelen said. He took her face in his hands. Stay here, watch the monitors. If anything looks wrong, you tell Bastion. Kaelen left, taking Marek and a dozen enforcers with him. Elara stood alone at the table, her heart pounding. She looked at the screens. She saw Kaelen walking out to the main gate to meet a sleek black limousine that had pulled up. Something was wrong. Elara looked back at the blueprints of the obsidian crag. She traced the lines of the foundation. The fortress had been built 20 years ago. Her father had been a young man then. He had worked on many projects in the region. Her blood ran cold. She zoomed in on the sublevels. There was an old service tunnel marked as collapsed sealed on the digital map. It ran deep under the mountain, connecting to an old silver mine that predated the pack. Bastion, Elara said, her voice trembling. Who built this place? Bastion looked up from his weapon check. A human contractor. High-end firm out of the city. Why? No, Elara said. Who did the foundation? The concrete work? I think it was a local subcontractor. Some guy named Thorn? No, wait. Archer. Elara stopped breathing. Archer, that was her father's last name. Silas hadn't just been tracking her because of her potential. He had been tracking her because he had her father's journals. He knew that her father had worked on the crag. He's not at the gate, Elara whispered. What? Bastion asked. Silas! Elara screamed, grabbing the radio. Kaelen! Kaelen! Get back inside! On the screen, the back door of the limousine opened. It was empty. A speaker on the car started playing a recorded message of Silas laughing. The tunnel! Elara shouted at Bastion. The old silver mine tunnel in the sublevels. It's not sealed. My father left a maintenance hatch for inspections. Silas knows! As if on cue, the entire building shook. Boom! The lights in the war room flickered and died, replaced by emergency red strobes. Breach! The tech officer screamed. Explosion in sublevel 3. They're inside. They bypassed the outer wall. Silas hadn't attacked the walls. He had come up from the floor. Get her to the safe room, Bastion roared, grabbing Elara's arm. No! Elara yanked her arm back. The safe room is on level 2. The ventilation for that room connects to the sublevels. If they pump gas in there, we're dead. Then where do we go? Bastion looked panicked. The impregnable fortress was suddenly a trap. The roof, Elara said, her mind racing, visualizing the schematics. The structural lattice on the roof is the strongest point, and it's the only place with a manual override for the lockdown gates. We need to get to Kaelen, Bastion said. Kaelen is locked out. Elara pointed to the screens. The explosion had triggered the automatic containment shutters. Massive steel doors had slammed down, sealing the main entrance. Kaelen was stuck outside with his best warriors. The enemy was inside with the women, the children, and Elara. He's trapped outside, Elara realized, horror washing over her. Silas separated the Alpha from the pack. Down in the sublevels, the sound of gunfire and snarling wolves echoed up the elevator shafts. The invaders were moving up fast. Elara grabbed a flare gun from the emergency kit on the wall. She looked at Bastion, her eyes hard. She wasn't a warrior, but she was the daughter of the man who built this place, and she knew how to break it. We have to manually blow the hydraulic seals on the main gate, Elara said. We have to let Kaelen in, or everyone in this building dies. That requires getting to the control room on level 1, Bastion said. That's right in their path. Then we better run fast, Elara said. She didn't wait for him. She sprinted out of the war room into the red-lit hallway. She wasn't building with branches anymore. She was fighting for her life in a castle made of glass, and the stones were about to start falling. The stairwell was a claustrophobic nightmare of red emergency lights and the echoing sound of claws on concrete. Bastion took the lead, his assault rifle raised, while Elara followed close behind, clutching the heavy flare gun. 2 floors down, Bastion hissed, kicking open the door to the level 1 corridor. The hallway was filled with smoke. The smell of burning rubber and ozone was overpowering. Through the haze, Elara saw bodies, guards from both packs. The invasion was messy and brutal. Clear, Bastion signaled, moving forward. But they weren't clear. As they passed the junction to the mess hall, a massive shape lunged from the shadows. It was a frost-bound wolf, shifting mid-air into human form to tackle Bastion. The gun skittered across the floor. Bastion roared, grappling with the intruder. They slammed into the wall, cracking the drywall. Elara scrambled back, raising the flare gun, but she couldn't fire. They were tangling too closely. She looked around frantically. Her eyes landed on a red pipe running along the ceiling. It was labeled Sprinkler Main, High Pressure. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed a fire axe from the emergency glass case on the wall. She didn't swing at the wolf. She swung at the pipe directly above them. Clang! The axe bit deep. The pipe burst. A jet of water, pressurized to suppress jet fuel fires, blasted downward with the force of a hammer. It hit the frost-bound wolf square in the back, slamming him into the floor and stunning him. Move! Elara screamed, grabbing Bastion's arm as he rolled away from the stunned attacker. They sprinted toward the control room at the end of the hall. The heavy steel door was slightly ajar. That's not right, Bastion panted, wiping blood from his lip. That door should be magnetic locked. They're already inside, Elara realized, her stomach dropping. They're waiting for us. She pushed the door open anyway. The control room was a circular chamber filled with screens and server racks. Standing in the center, casually leaning against the main console, was Alpha Silas. He looked impeccable, wearing a dark suit that was only slightly dusted with debris. Vance, his scout, stood behind him, holding a knife to the throat of the lead technician. Elara? Silas smiled, his teeth too white, his eyes too cold. I knew you'd come. You always were the responsible one, unlike your father. Don't talk about him, Elara said, her voice steady despite the terror gripping her heart. She stepped into the room, signaling Bastion to stay back. Why not? He built this place. He built the tunnel I used to get in. He was a genius. It's a shame I had to kill him. But then, he wouldn't give me the journals. You, however, you brought them to me. I brought you nothing, Elara spat. You brought yourself, Silas corrected. He gestured to the console. Now, be a good girl and open the main vault. I know Kaelen keeps his liquid assets there. Open the vault, and I'll leave the building standing. If you blow the building, you die too, Elara said. I have the tunnel, Silas smirked. I'll be gone before the dust settles. But Kaelen? He's trapped outside. He'll watch his pack burn. Elara looked at the console. Then she looked at the screens. On the external feed, she saw Kaelen. He was in his wolf form, throwing himself against the blast doors, his fur matted with blood from fighting the perimeter guards. He was desperate. He was trying to claw through solid steel to get to her. She looked at the hydraulic pressure gauges for the main gate. The vault is on a time lock, Elara lied. I can't open it. Don't lie to me, Silas snarled, his composure cracking. He stepped forward, his eyes flashing red. I know what you are. You're a human calculator. Open it, or I kill the beta. He pointed a gun at Bastion. Elara's mind raced. She looked at the schematic on the desk. The main gate wasn't just a door. It was a 5-ton slab of steel operated by 4 hydraulic pistons. If she released the pressure valves without disengaging the lock, the pistons would explode, but the explosion would also blow the blast door off its hinges. It was a gamble, a massive one. Okay, Elara said softly. I'll do it. She walked to the console. Silas watched her like a hawk, keeping the gun trained on Bastion. Elara typed in a command, not the vault code, but the maintenance override code for the gate hydraulics. Warning, system pressure critical. The screen flashed in red text only she could see. What are you doing? Silas asked, stepping closer. That's too many keystrokes. Encryption, Elara muttered. She looked at the pressure reading. 4,000 psi. Now! Elara screamed, dropping to the floor. She hit enter. The sound wasn't an explosion. It was a scream of metal. The hydraulic lines in the walls of the corridor outside ruptured, but the main force was directed at the gate. The pistons fired, but the lock held for a millisecond before the sheer kinetic energy sheared the bolts. Boom! The blast door didn't open. It was blown inward, tumbling down the hallway like a leaf in a hurricane. The shockwave knocked Silas off his feet. The glass screens in the control room shattered, raining shards everywhere. Elara covered her head, the floor trembling beneath her. Silence followed for a heartbeat. Then a roar shook the foundations of the obsidian crag. It was a roar of pure, unadulterated dominance. Through the smoke in the ruined doorway, a massive black shape emerged. Kaelen. He didn't look like a king. He looked like a god of war. His eyes were burning gold fire. He saw Silas trying to scramble to his feet. Kaelen didn't shift back to human form. He didn't waste time with words. He launched himself across the room. Silas tried to raise his gun, but he was too slow. Kaelen's jaws clamped around Silas's forearm, crushing bone. Silas screamed, a sound that was cut short as Kaelen slammed him into the server racks. Sparks flew as the electronics shorted out. It was brutal. It was fast. It was the law of the wild. Silas fell motionless. Kaelen stood over the body, his chest heaving. He turned his massive head, scanning the room frantically. Kaelen! Elara crawled out from under the desk. She was covered in dust and glass, but she was whole. The giant wolf whimpered. He trotted over to her, nuzzling her face, licking the soot from her cheek. He collapsed to the floor, shifting back into his human form. He was naked, bleeding from a dozen cuts, but he pulled her into his arms, as if she were the only thing tethering him to the earth. I thought I lost you, he rasped, burying his face in her hair. I couldn't get in the doors. I opened them, Elara whispered, hugging him back tightly. I broke the door. Kaelen pulled back, looking at the ruined control room, the shattered hydraulics, and the dead enemy Alpha. He let out a breathless, incredulous laugh. You didn't break the door, Elara, he said, kissing her forehead. You blew the damn thing up. Bastion groaned from the corner, standing up and dusting off his vest. Remind me, the beta muttered, never to make her angry. 6 months later, the snow had melted, giving way to a lush, vibrant spring. The Northern Territory was green and alive. In the valley where Elara had once tried to build a shelter out of rotting sticks, a new structure stood. It was a masterpiece. It wasn't a fortress of concrete and steel, but a cabin of warm cedar and stone, blending perfectly into the landscape. It had large glass windows that caught the morning sun and a wide porch that smelled of fresh rain. Elara stood on the porch, sanding the railing. She wore a simple flannel shirt and jeans, looking healthy and strong. The scars on her hands had faded, though they would never fully disappear. They were badges of honor now. You're working too hard, a deep voice said from the doorway. Kaelen stepped out, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He looked relaxed, the tension that used to live in his shoulders gone. The war with Frostbound had ended the moment Silas died. The remaining pack members had either fled or surrendered, absorbed into the Obsidian Fang under Kaelen's fair rule. I'm just finishing the touch, Elara smiled, accepting the coffee. Kaelen wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder, looking out at the valley. The council sent the contract today, Kaelen said. They want to hire you to redesign the Citadel's defenses. I saw, Elara said, leaning into him. I haven't decided if I'll take it. Why not? It pays a fortune. I'm busy, Elara said, turning in his arms to face him. She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. Kaelen froze. His golden eyes went wide. He looked at her stomach, then at her face. Elara? He whispered, his voice trembling with a different kind of intensity. I think we're going to need an extension on the nursery, she smiled. And I have some specific ideas about the structural reinforcement for the crib. Kaelen didn't speak. He simply picked her up, spinning her around as his laughter echoed through the valley, a sound of pure, unburdened joy. The rogue who had built a home from broken branches was gone. In her place stood the queen of the Obsidian Crag, the architect of the North, and the heart of the Alpha King. She had built a life that would never fall down. This story reminds us that true strength isn't just about muscle or claws. It's about the resilience of the mind and the heart. Elara started with nothing but broken branches. Yet through her intelligence and determination, she not only saved herself, but became the cornerstone of the most powerful pack in the North. It proves that even when the world sees you as a reject, you have the power to build your own destiny. If you want to hear more stories of resilience, romance, and alphas who meet their match, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Your support helps us keep these tales alive. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss a new chapter in the wolf world.